Okay. Good morning, everyone. This is the presentation on the final report of the Capital Assistance for Local Farmers project from Friends of Family Farmers and all the partners involved who we're going to talk about in just a moment. Thank you so much for coming, and we're very excited to share the report on this USDA funded project with the world. My name, oops. My name is Alice Morrison. I'm the co-executive director of Friends of Family Farmers, and I have been the administrative billing and strategic alignment contact for the project, which essentially means I wrote the initial grant and that funded the project. So we're coming full circle. Thank you to everyone joining us today. This meeting will be recorded, so we're gonna go through the main portion of the report, and then we will turn off the recording for Q&A afterwards. So we're going to hold questions until the end so that we can post this recording on our website and YouTube channel so folks can have access to it in perpetuity. So if you have questions during the presentation, please do put them in the chat, and my colleague Brittany will keep track of them, and we will start with the questions from the chat at the end when we start with our Q&A period. All right. So, Friends of Family Farmers is the lead organization on this project. For those of you who are not familiar with our work, we have been around since 2005. We're celebrating our 20th anniversary this year, and we operate two technical assistance programs for farmers across the state. We tend to work with folks who are small and mid-size according to USDA sales brackets. And we work predominantly with folks who are highly diversified and focused on local markets. So be that direct to consumer markets, farm to institution, small scale wholesale or medium scale wholesale, but we tend to work with folks who are interested in selling into the community where they live and work. Our two technical assistance programs that we operate in all the time are Oregon Pasture Network. So it's a community of practice and marketing platform and mentorship program for folks who are raising animals on pasture. The OPN does skills trainings, has a mentorship program to connect experienced farmers with beginning farmers or folks who are looking to scale their business. We also have a product guide on our website with all of the OPN members. So if you are looking to buy values aligned meat from a producer in your area, check out OregonPastureNetwork.org. We also run Oregon's FarmLink. So Oregon FarmLink is a land access program. It's been around for over a decade, and you can list yourself on that platform in a profile as a land seeker who is seeking farmland for your business, or a landholder who is seeking the next steward of the farmland that you are in control of. So if you fit into one of those categories, you are seeking land security for your farm business, or you have land that you wish was being farmed, or you are getting ready to retire or pass on that land, please do check out Oregon FarmLink and make yourself a listing to find the right person to take on that project. We also offer one-on-one case management for land seekers through the FarmLink Navigate program. You can apply for Navigate through the Oregon FarmLink website. Head on over to OregonFarmLink.org for more information. We accept applications on a rolling basis. Um, in addition to these two programs, we also work on emerging topics and long-term problems in the small farm world, which is why we're working on this today, because we do surveys and focus groups every 2 years, and capital access, along with land access, access to affordable and appropriate capital and land is the number one barrier for success to farms, small scale farms and direct to consumer farms that we work with here in Oregon. So today we are going to talk about the CAF project. We're going to start with project context, then move to discussing the partners who were involved. Then we're going to talk about outcomes and methods. And at the end, we'll discuss the recommendations that came out of this process and how we can improve the funding landscape to give more access to the farmers that we prioritized in this project. Oops. Okay, so project context. Why are we working on this? As I said before, we do a biennial data gathering process every even numbered year. So every time there's a short session in the Oregon legislature, we go out into the community and gather information about the barriers and opportunities to small, highly diversified local market farming here in Oregon. And as I said before, capital access is one of the number one concerns. There never seems to be enough or the right opportunity or the right technical assistance to access the opportunity for the farmers that we see. And it's a perennial problem that the what's available is not matching up with the need. And they, as in the farmers that we serve, have also told us that they don't feel like they are able to give critical feedback to funding partners in the mix for fear of not being able to access those resources in the future and the power dynamic that is within the system. We also heard from partners all over the state. So you're going to see many partners in this project, and we have heard from them that folks want more information about available funding opportunities. They need more technical assistance in building the skills within our farmer population to be able to access grants and loans for the projects they actually want to complete. And then we also got inquiries from funders. We often get outreach from traditional conventional lending entities, government programs, both state and federal, and grant programs from other nonprofits that are looking to get in touch with the type of farmers that we serve. So we saw that there is both a need on the farmer side for more information and skills in being able to access these funds, and then also need to build relationships with the funder side so that they know that their outreach is reaching the people that they're trying to target with these funds. So why are we focusing on this demographic? So in the grant, we did propose that we were going to work focusing on small, highly diversified and local market farmers. Excuse me. And that is because not only is that the population that FOF predominantly works with, but Oregon, according to the USDA's local food marketing survey, Oregon is 8th in the nation for direct-to-consumer farm sales. This is a very big part of how we work as an agricultural economy here in Oregon. Locally focused farmers create more jobs and recirculate more money within their immediate communities, according to a study in Central Oregon from OSU. And that is something that we've always thought. And in these times when there are economic uncertainties and the need for communities to be resilient and be able to take care of themselves, both in feeding themselves and having strong rural economies to make sure folks have access to the resources that they need, focusing on this type of farmer does make a bigger impact. We also know that this is a growing sector of agriculture based on the information from USDA in the 2022 Census of Agriculture and the 2020 local farm sales data, direct-to-consumer farm sales data. This is a sector of agriculture that is growing. And we know that more young farmers are choosing this sector. So in Oregon, our average age of the farmers across the state is right around 59 years old, but people who are engaged in this type of sales are more likely to be 34 and under than any other type of sales that USDA gets data for. So that is something that to indicate that this is a real growing sector. It is a sector in agriculture that is attracting new folks to the industry. And as we've seen farmer numbers and farm numbers decline over the last decades, pretty much since the 50s, it's really important to look into these sectors where we're getting more producers and see how we can build up the way that we resource these folks and the way that we give them pathways to business success. So we used a grant program at USDA called the Regional Food Systems Partnership Program in 2023. That is the funding that has made this project possible. We began the work in the fall of 2023, in September. And the point of this work was to build on existing channels to distribute this report and the network resource inventory to raise the level of service across the state and bring all current service providers who are already getting these questions from their farmers into this network so that we would be able to give the same amount of service and same level of care across the state. We also are using this process to set the stage for future action. And I will say that USDA has two types of grants. They have planning grants and implementation grants. This was a planning grant. And so one of the main goals of the report that we're talking about today is to serve as a basis for the partners involved to jump off and take more action to serve the farmers in their community. We're going to talk about the partners, and you're going to recognize a lot of them. And make sure that there was a strong basis and that we had farmer input at every stage, and making sure that the programs that we're designing were really grounded in the community that we want to serve, and make sure that there was representation of producers at every stage of this process. So this project had 3 outcomes. The first was the community of practice, which is the service provider community, where we are connecting funders and these TA providers to make sure that we are providing both accurate and actionable information to the people that we're serving, and increasing their chances and the likelihood that they will be successful. Network resource inventory. So this is something that we've been asked for several times across many different venues, I guess is a good word for it, but to provide a centralized location for folks to access information about funding opportunities, about technical assistance related to grant writing, to loan readiness, to making sure that you have all of the things, all of your ducks in a row to have a successful application to one of these financial institutions or grant makers. And the project report, which we're talking about today, which is both a combination of lessons learned and new data that we gathered throughout the project to help make this the continuation of this work more successful. Okay, so that's about the project itself. And now I'm going to talk about who was involved in the process. So we have 3 types of partners involved in this project. TA partners, so technical assistance partners. Then we have funding partners, and we have the Farmer Advisory Committee. So TA partners are organizations around the state who are currently working with this population of diversified local market small farmers, both in business areas or farming skills. So they have an existing relationship with their farming community, and they are the folks who are getting these questions on a daily basis and want to provide services to their community to make sure that the farmers who are coming to them, who participate in their other programs, are getting the most access to capital resources that they are looking for and that they deserve. So the folks, we have a lot of partners in the room and in the project, and we officially partnered with North Coast Food Web, Adelante Mujeres, Black Food Sovereignty Coalition, the Coast Fork of the Willamette Watershed Council Working Lands Program. Willamette Farm and Food was a partner for year 1 of this project. Rogue Valley Food Systems Network, Klamath Grown, High Desert Farm and Food Alliance, Oregon Farm Corps, previously Rogue Farm Corps. They have a new name. Check out their new website. And Oregon Community Food Systems Network. Also, FOF was a TA partner in the grant. We administered the grant and ran the community of practice, but we had one of our staff members participating as a TA partner as well, because we also get these questions on a very regular basis. The funding partners who were involved, they are organizations, businesses, and agencies who have grants and loans available to our target population of farmers. So the folks who were in the room for this are Ag West, Oregon Department of Agriculture, Oregon Watershed Enhancement Board, Natural Resources Conservation Service, NRCS, and the Farm Service Agency, USDA loan officers. Especially, we want to shout out to Derek Johnson, the FSA beginning farmer specialist, for his participation here. We really appreciated the participation of all these funders throughout the process. And then we have our Farmer Advisory Committee. So this is a representation of the folks that we are serving in this project. So farmers in Oregon who are highly diversified in their crop structure, considered small by USDA sales brackets, and focused on local markets. And membership in that committee fluctuated from 3 to 5 members throughout the project period. And thank you so much for all the farmers who were part of that advisory committee. I'm not listing individuals' names because I did not ask for permission to do so before this meeting, so sorry about that. But their input is all over this process, and they vetted all of the data collection tools, the survey and focus group plans. They had access to all of the community of practice meetings. They also provided information during those meetings, which we'll talk about in a moment, and were very involved in the editing and honing of the report. So we're very, very grateful for all of the input that this Farmer Advisory Committee had throughout the process. All right. So I talked about what the project is, who the project involved, and now like what did we actually do? So, as I said, the things that we were focusing on are the community of practice, the network resource inventory, and the project report. So the community of practice met 10 times, twice in person throughout the grant period. And what we did in those meetings was a mixture of farmer case studies. So that's where our Farmer Advisory Committee came in. Some of them presented on their own experience and asked for advice or presented real world examples of how they have interacted with farm loan and grant systems as they stand currently, ask questions about how this could have gone differently, how they were prepared for these opportunities, and we asked a lot of questions about eligibility and which programs are the right fit for which farmers. We had presentations from our funding partners to help better understand, again, eligibility and the right fit for these programs, especially with some of the state programs that have come out of the Oregon Ag Heritage Program at OWEB and some of the ODA grant programs that are available. We had discussions of the power and decision-making structures for federal and state government programs. Something that was a constant point of discussion in this group was whether or not things that we were bringing up as barriers were able to be changed by the people in the room. Some of these things are enshrined in federal and state legislation and would take legislative campaigns to change. And that can be really, really daunting and also can be really disheartening for the folks in the room who are being told that their program is not working for a reason that they are not allowed to change. So that's something that we talked about a lot about where the levers of power are if we're going to make changes to these programs to make them more accessible. And we're going to talk about which changes we're recommending in a later section of this presentation. We also had discussions about common pitfalls and struggles of the farmers in the funding process. So we had a lot of anonymized but specific discussions with grant makers about where a farmer's application can turn a corner and not be successful, so that the TA providers in the room can give good advice about how to make your application more competitive and really make it so that you stand the best chance of getting your project funded if it's a project grant, or getting your operating loan, getting your land purchase loan. Like, where are the things that people commonly fall down on, and how can we make sure that those stumbling blocks are removed from a technical assistance standpoint? We also had a lot of roundtable discussions of possible program improvements to increase small farm representation and capital access. So there was, during the Biden administration, there were a lot of programs that were focused on regenerative agriculture, focused on small farms, focused on community food systems. But for all of those talking points, a lot of the farmers that we work with said that they didn't see any of that money on the ground. They didn't feel like they had access to it. They didn't feel represented in those programs. And now that we're in a different administration and those priorities have changed, that's another thing that they have to consider, is that, like, when the opportunity arises, is that reaching our community? And how can we ensure that the folks who fit those criteria in our community have access to those funds and are the most competitive in the process that they can be? Oh, come on. There we go. Challenges in the community of practice. So there was a little feeling of disconnection in the community of practice because the original structure of the COP was to have 3-hour quarterly meetings where we did a deep dive on case studies or funding opportunities, but that led to a lot of time in between meetings. And we also had a pretty lengthy funding freeze in this project, which came at a very inopportune time, which we'll talk about later in this presentation. But that posed a really big challenge in getting the continuity that we needed to build relationship and make sure that these that these conversations were turned into action. So that was something, because it's a statewide group and we felt really strongly that we wanted to have representation from most parts of the state. We'll talk about some of the limitations of this data set and who wasn't at the table later in the presentation, but we did have representation from a lot of different regions of the state, and that meant that we couldn't meet in person all the time, and we had to predominantly meet in video meetings, and that has challenges for maintaining those connections outside of the quarterly meetings. We also saw that there were some different priorities and different goals from TA partners to funding partners, and then amongst the TA partners and amongst the funding partners. Funding partners did express that they have high demand for their programs, and yes, they want to have more participation from our target group of farmers, but they are not in a position where there is a lack of demand for their program and that they're not getting any applications. And the TA partners felt successful when their farmers had more access, were more successful in the applications, were putting in more applications and feeling comfortable in the process. And so that's kind of those are two separate priorities there. One is increasing the diversity of your outreach to different types of farmers, different community partners, all of that wonderful thing. But at the end of the day, they have applications for these programs. And then on the other side, the TA partners have a specific group of farmers that they work with, and they want those folks to have more access to these, to be more successful in their applications. And those are just slightly competing priorities. Well, maybe not competing, but just different. There is a variety of professional development levels in the group. So we got some feedback throughout the process that some folks in the group, they didn't have any training in this area before. And this was a really, really, really influential and wonderful part of the last 2 years of their professional development. They learned a lot about how decisions are made, grant processes, funding calendars, who is in charge of different types of programs in the state, lots and lots and lots of great information. And then there are some folks in the group who were already at that high level, already had that level of visibility and understanding, and were looking to take an even deeper dive. But we needed to raise the level of understanding of the processes and players and the landscape to that benchmark before we could dive in deeper. So if you were already up here, the community of practice, you helped a lot of people catch up, but you didn't necessarily advance your knowledge at the same rate as some other folks in the group. Also, like I said before, we ran into some systems change problems because often we were dealing, thank you so much to especially Wallace Jennings of NRCS, who was very, very active in this process. But he was also very upfront with us that there are a lot of things that would have to be changed in legislation on the federal level for him to approach differently in NRCS with their farmer conservation programs and things like that. So we can give recommendations and we can set the stage for future action, but some things are not within the control of the people in the room and require systems change to be different in the future. Okay, benefits of the community practice. A greater capacity for smaller TA partners. So that goes back to that professional development question, is that through this community of practice, we raised the level of professional development for a lot of the smaller community-based partners throughout the state. And that was a really, really important part of this process, is to give everyone who participated the same access to information and bringing folks together to raise the level of TA that can be provided across the state, because we know that a lot of resources are concentrated in the Willamette Valley. And while there are a lot of farmers in the Willamette Valley, and that makes sense, there are small farms, diversified farmers, local market farmers in every region of the state. And we wanted to acknowledge that and make sure that folks have the same access to TA, no matter where you are in the state, if you're doing this type of work. Supportive and collaborative culture. We worked very hard to build trust and understanding between the partners, and that led to a lot of very deep conversations and very hard conversations about where folks were talking about resource distribution, about the real impacts on their community of not being able to access these funding resources, and whether or not that was going to have an impact on food security, whether or not that was going to have an impact on some farmers over others, and acknowledging the inconsistencies created by history, by the history of discrimination in the state, all of those things that come together. We had a lot of very hard conversations, and that was only possible because of the supportive and collaborative culture of the COP. Now, this COP also, of course, it's open to new members, and if you would like to be added to the listserv, let Brittany know. But this is a built-in coalition for future systems level work. So when we identify those systems change things where we need to pass a law to change how a funding opportunity is structured, this coalition is built right in, and we could jump off from that because that is also something that Friends of Family Farmers does, is we do some limited state-based and limited federal legislative advocacy to change laws to make the system work for the farmers that we serve. Okay, the network resource inventory is the next thing. So throughout this process, we built a new, let me actually escape and go here. So we built a new resource inventory, resource library for in perpetuity. This will continue beyond the program. This is available through FOF's website. It's resources.friendsofamilyfarmers.org. Brittany can throw that in the chat, and you can go down here to find resources and click the Capital Assistance for Local Farmers project, submit, and you will be taken to all of these different resources, some of which we created and some of which are just funding opportunities, and all of the things that you need to know about what that funding opportunity is for, who's running it, when it's due, all those kinds of things. There are some that expire. So for example, there's a workshop on December 11th from Ag West for Field to Funding New Farmer Lending Stories. So that's a storytelling workshop where you can learn more skills and hear from folks who have been successful in getting farm credit. There's also some other opportunities here. A grant deadline, the Healthy Foods Financing Initiative, is due on the 31st, and these do expire when they are no longer available. They're not going to be up on the website, so we're trying to keep this as current as possible. And so, yeah, make sure to check this out anytime you are looking for some new funding opportunities, or if you're looking for TA opportunities or things like that. The CAF glossary is something that we created through the project. Read more. So when you click read more, you come into one of these cards and you can download the file. It's a PDF file for all of the commonly used phrases and words that are in grant and loan applications that you might not know how to do. So when they're talking about cash match versus in-kind match, or like what counts as collateral, or those kinds of things, that is a glossary for you to use when you are filling out those applications and want to know exactly what they mean. Like, what is the difference between a P&L and a balance sheet, and that kind of thing. So this was how we decided to approach the network resource inventory. And then if you go up here to suggest a resource, anyone can suggest the resource title and a link to that resource. So if you have something on your program's website, you know of a grant opportunity that's not on this website, we are constantly adding more, and we would love to have your help in suggesting new resources. So it's going to ask you your resource title, content, link to the resource, and then ask you to check which categories it should be listed in. And if it's a funding resource, check the Capital Assistance for Local Farmers. And then if it only applies to pastured livestock, or it only applies to crop production, make sure to note that. Some things are only available to beginning farmers, and some things are available to all farmers. So you check both of those. Make sure to fill out all of these different types so that we can make sure it's coded correctly. But this is something that came out of the project that will be available in perpetuity. So yeah, make sure to check that out. And the network resource inventory will be maintained by FOF in the future, and it will be available, we're hoping, forever. So the plan is forever. All right, so data gathering for the report. And let me do a time check. Okay, I need to speed up. So, data gathering for the report involved the farmer survey and TA partner focus groups and one-on-one farmer interviews. So we had a statewide survey go out. We're going to talk about that in just a second. And all the TA partners listed, so all of those regional and culturally specific groups did two focus groups. And the funding freeze did kind of throw a wrench into that because it was poorly timed for the farm season. So some of those had to convert into one-on-one interviews, but we did get a good amount of feedback. So the farmer survey, this was a statewide effort. We had 190 responses from farmers across the state. And I just want to shout out Adaptive Seeds. We had a partnership with them, and everybody who filled out the survey got a coupon code for a free seed packet so you could try something new. Whether that's just in your kitchen garden or if you wanted to test a new variety, you could reach out to Adaptive or deem that coupon code and get a seed packet for your participation. So thanks, Adaptive. So things that we learned from the survey. Farmers felt somewhat confident to confident in these areas at, oh gosh, oops. This is not showing up the way that I hoped it would because you can't see the numbers. Okay. But people were most confident about putting together a clear, detailed budget for a grant application, then accurately depicting their farm and its operation, applying for and managing grant funds to support new on-farm projects, talking with loan officers to help them navigate loan processes with FSA or USDA, and even less so navigating the financial paperwork necessary to qualify for a farm loan. So that's something that we think we saw throughout the process is that the farmers that we were working with were much more likely to consider themselves confident when it came to grants rather than loans. And that could be for a multitude of reasons that they are seeing grant programs as more accessible than loans. But loans are a very big part of the farm funding landscape. And so having lower confidence in those areas does put our farmers at a disadvantage when you're thinking about competitiveness with other businesses in the space. Oh, again, I made this too big and you cannot see the numbers, but what types of resources would farmers find helpful in order to submit a grant or loan application? So what are folks asking for to be able to do better on these applications and be more competitive? Some tips and tricks as well as a toolkit were very popular. So folks want templates. Folks want direct advice on how to structure your answers to the questions in order to make sure you're fully answering the question, you're representing your business the best it can be, and that your application will be competitive when you submit it. There's also a request for examples and templates on budgets, even though that we saw last time that the confidence in getting a budget together was pretty high. Folks would like to see project budgets and templates in that space. And then lower but still very popular were technical assistance in writing the application and help in knowing which type of loan is right for their farm operation. So it is very possible that folks feel like they're putting their efforts in a direction that's not helping them. So folks are telling us that they want more direct feedback on, okay, this is what the grantor or loan officer is looking for. Here's how to structure it. Because when folks know what they're being asked, they're able to deliver. But sometimes farmers in this process felt like they didn't know what details to include, or they felt like they were trying to fit a square peg into a round hole and that the loan or grant was not the right type for their project or operation. And but they didn't know what else to do. All right. So in the report, you can see the numbers on the bottom of this. I'm sorry that that didn't translate right here, but how can small farmers better access types of resources that do exist currently to help apply for funding opportunities? The number one thing that was requested was a central place online where the resources exist and they know where to find them. That's what we were hoping to accomplish with the Network Resource Inventory, the resources website from FOF. The second thing, which is going to factor heavily into our recommendations, is that funding opportunities should become available during winter when people have time to work on them. The majority of the state has well, pretty much the whole state. You can extend your growing season, but many people have a slow period in the winter. Especially folks who are doing annual crops have a slow period in the winter where admin is much more possible. The concentration of administrative tasks in this part of the farm season is something that we heard over and over and over again. And frustration from farmers who were continually seeing farm-based grants for small farmers and sole proprietors and owner operators concentrate that had application periods in the summer, which is their high season, which is when they need to run their business so that they can grow their crop, sell their crop, so they can apply, like have a business to apply for the grant or loan for. So that was something that we heard continuously, that if you are targeting this type of farmer, you need to work around the seasonal calendar. We also heard a lot about the need to break down financial jargon and these kinds of grant writing terms that a professional grant writer, someone in the nonprofit sphere, may know, but someone who is concentrated on running their farm and producing the best farm product for their community, they might not have the training to know exactly what you mean by an executive summary, like what should be in that. Or like I said, the difference between a P&L and a balance sheet, or they should, like, we want to make sure that folks know what they're being asked for so they can be the most competitive. Okay, so then the general results from the farmer focus group, we had 177 farmers participate in this process across all TA programs, so that's a total. There were interruptions due to the funding freeze. We were frozen for about 6 weeks in like beginning of February to mid-March, which was the sweet spot for doing a lot of these focus groups. That is the high time right before folks have to be in the field daily. We tend to have, FROF has been doing this kind of farmer outreach for a long time, and we try to concentrate our farmer outreach from the beginning of January to the middle of March, because at the end of the season in the fall and through the holidays, people are busy and they're very tired. Everyone's burnt out. Before I worked for FOF, I was a market gardener. And yeah, I did not want to do anything other than like see my friends and take a nap in the month of December. But January, new year, thinking about the new season, you have a little bit more energy, you're forward looking, but you don't need to be in the field every single day in January and February. So that is the time where we have gotten the best outreach, and folks have had the most time and the most energy to devote to these types of things. So having the funding freeze on this grant, because it was federally funded during that time, did interrupt the ability for folks to conduct their focus groups. But that led to some TA groups pivoting to one-on-one interviews using the same questions that were in the focus group plan, but just having those one-on-one conversations and interviews in order to collect this information. I just want to make sure folks are aware of like how we differed from the proposed methodology in case you're looking at this as a body of research. So the outcomes that we're seeing throughout the focus groups and some of the trends in the feedback we received there is a mismatch in process of funding opportunity and small farm operations. So there was a mismatch in the expectation of the scales of the farms and the revenue. For many small farm grant programs, people who are just starting out, when you're targeting beginning farmers and expecting them to already be at a pretty mid-size threshold of sales is not realistic. We also saw that there was some confusion about documentation, reporting, and collateral, and that those things should be clarified up front so folks understand what they're getting into. And then one thing that we want to touch on, especially for grant and loan programs that have the ability to change this, is that 3-year financial history of the farm business is a huge barrier. There are a lot of people that we talk to who have a ton of farm experience, but were a farm manager or farm crew leader on someone else's farm, and they were a W-2 employee while they were building their business plan and saving up to make that leap into farm business owner. But that means that they have a ton of experience. They know exactly what they want to do, but they don't have that 3-year financial history in their own farm business. And we would highly encourage folks to, if you can be flexible in that, taking work experience on someone else's farm at a decision-making level as that same level of experience as a 3-year financial history for the farm business, because that is a very common position to be in. If you're trying to make that leap from farm employee to farm operator, that's a really hard time because you don't qualify for things in that first 3 years. Skill building is essential to farmer capital access. Mentorship and individual support is something that people really, really needed help with. We heard a lot of times that folks were very frustrated by the fact that often they would be given the answer of, oh, well, it depends. Like when you would attend a grant webinar where they're talking about an opportunity and you're like, okay, I need to know if this will fit for this project that I want to do because there's no point in me applying if this project is ineligible. And then not being able to get a straight answer from the grant maker because they know that it depends on so many individual factors. And they don't have time in that moment to give you all the information. So they say, meh, I don't know, you should just try. That's really frustrating to the farmers that we worked with because that's a lot of time and effort and frankly money that they're spending putting into this application, not knowing if they're the right fit. Lack of grant writing skills, like we said before, many people do not become farmers in order to write more grants. That's not something a lot of people are used to doing. And there is a specific way of writing grants. It's a form of technical writing. And so having those skills available, and someone to teach you what they are expecting, what is going on. And also farmers do not have if you don't have the capacity to devote to this new conservation project, the likelihood that you have also have the capital available to hire a professional grant writer is pretty low. So we want to make sure that that we are helping folks build their own skills and build skills within the community so that we are not limiting the access of capital to only folks who have the ability to hire a grant writer to do this type of work. Also, like we said earlier, lack of admin time for researching opportunity, organizing documentation, filling out applications. That is where that seasonal calendar comes in again and again in this feedback. Structural changes for greater access that were proposed during the focus groups. Simplification of grant and loan processes is essential. If it's People always talked about in many, many of the focus groups that they were asked the same question 5 different ways. And they felt both like the application was either insulting their intelligence by thinking that they weren't answering the question truthfully the first time, or that there was some kind of secret code that they were missing, that they were actually different questions, but they appeared to be the same question over and over again. So the simplification of that grant and loan process is essential. An increase in transparency. Folks wanted to have more feedback about why they were denied because they don't know what to change in the future to have a better chance. More flexibility in how the funds were spent. We're looking here, very interesting to see that there needs to be more options in operating capital is what we're really hearing here. So there are a lot of program specific or project specific grants out there, but there are not as many accessible operating capital sources. Timing of grant cycles is not realistic. Either the turnaround time is very, very short and folks don't feel like they have adequate time to put in a detailed application, or the timing of the cycle, asking for applications in July, August, and September, very difficult for a lot of folks. Reimbursement grants are not possible for small and beginning operations. Having like many people pursue grants, we especially heard this about like infrastructure improvements. People pursue grants because they don't have access to the capital to front the costs. So if you are just putting $40,000 on a credit card and hoping that NRCS gets back to you as quickly as possible, that can be really, really, really detrimental to the financial health of a beginning farm. Because carrying that debt burden, you're going to be accruing interest on that the whole time. And then you're only being reimbursed for the rate, the upfront amount, and it's not possible for a lot of small businesses. The cash flow does not pencil out, and it makes people really, really feel like it's a dangerous thing to do. Okay, overall takeaways from survey and focus groups. Structural incongruities between grant programs and the growing season. We're talking about this a lot. Flexible funding is needed in the small farm realm. Farmers need support and skills to access current resources. Oops. So those are the big themes that there are. If you out there are targeting small farms for your grant program, please, please, please consider the small farm calendar and making sure that there are no natural barriers, as in like the growing season, to your program and the farmers that you're trying to access. Flexible funding, operating capital, the many, many options there. Folks who do not have access to traditional operating capital loans or don't feel that they have access or haven't been able to find the right program or haven't been able to qualify, that farming in this country is built on operating capital and a little bit of a debt cycle, which we're hoping to help people get out of. But operating capital is so necessary to farming in many, many, many other realms, and it's just not accessible to folks in this type of farming, although it's one of the fastest growing sectors of agriculture in the state. And farmers need support and skills to access current resources. That's where our TA partners can step in and help. Okay, how are we doing on time? Not good. Okay, so recommendations. So these are our final recommendations from the project, is that farmer-centric funding opportunities need to be prioritized. If you are developing a new funding opportunity, we have some steps that you can take to make it more farmer-centric. One-on-one resource navigation should be a focus of future programming. First round feedback and application support are just as important as having that webinar and putting it up on your website. We also have ideas in the near, mid, and long term for standardization of process that both funding institutions and TA partners could undertake in near, mid, and long term to make this process more accessible. So farmer-centric funding opportunities, that means that grant application timelines should fall across the winter months. We would recommend December to February. No deadlines in December, but opening in November, December, having deadlines in January, February, or early March would be ideal. Funds should be awarded up front. We discussed the debt burden for small farms, especially for infrastructure programs. More open-ended and general awards are needed. We would love to see more operating capital available to this type of farmer. And reporting requirements should be simplified. So that means that establishing reporting requirements up front and making sure that folks are aware of the data that they need to collect when the funds are awarded. And language should be simple and clear. Avoid jargon at all costs, or be prepared to explain exactly what you mean by something, because there are many, many similar terms across the grant and loan sphere that can be very confusing and have been tripping people up. Okay, one-on-one resource navigation. So this was something that was recommended as how service providers should be thinking about future programming. Consider case management as an approach. FOF has experience doing case management for land seekers, but this is very direct feedback that we received during this process, is that case management is something that folks want us to consider, and all the partners in the program to consider when you're expanding your offerings for capital access, is that having that relationship between the TA provider and the farmer will make it easier to identify eligible opportunities. It will help you to make sure that opportunity, grant or loan, is the best fit possible. There, yes. And investment is needed in this area, and we need to be realistic about the caseloads that this can handle. So we want to make sure that this is not something where folks are just done like you just get an intake and somebody has 45 farmers that they're supposed to be working with on a case management basis. That is unrealistic. We want to make sure that as these things are built out, that they can deliver on their service promises, and that we are using any resources that are devoted to this in a way that will have the biggest impact for the people that we're serving. Okay, so first round feedback and application support. Pre-submission completeness reviews are recommended. If you are a funder who wants to make this more accessible to beginning farmers, small farmers, folks who are not traditionally represented in the grant and loan process, pre-submission completeness reviews are a great way to upfront make folks have a better outcome. So what that means is you're not passing any judgment on what is in the content of the application, but you're just looking through and you are checking to make sure that they have fully answered every question and that they have submitted the correct document. Because something that we heard over and over again was like that a grant or loan application would be denied because they submitted the wrong documentation, or they didn't fully answer a question, but that was not communicated to folks. And so they did not know what to improve on or why they were refused. So those pre-submission completeness reviews are highly recommended and will lead to both better outcomes and better relationships for your funding opportunity. Designated contact for the application support beyond an applicant webinar and recording. We know that that is really difficult to do because that is FTE that you have to find as a funder. But it is incredibly important to have someone available and have the correct amount of TA available. If you are getting an incredible amount of requests, you should assign more people to that. We understand that people have work plans, that there is limited capacity, but if you have a funding opportunity that your goal is to make accessible to this population of farmers, meet the TA need for application support. It's very, very important that upfront support will make your applications both easier to complete and more successful in the long run. Standardization of process. So these are some structural changes that we would like to propose to the funding landscape as we know it right now to better serve this population of farmers in the future. So the first thing, the near term, is to develop a farmer toolkit or portfolio so that this is something the TA partners can do right now, and we have already started talking about, is to develop a template portfolio that we can help farmers build via a workshop or a clinic or something like that, so that when you see a grant application that you think would benefit your farm or a loan application, you have all your information already sorted out. We can help you walk through the process of getting the financial documentation. We can help you build a comprehensive narrative of your farm philosophy if this is a like a values or practices based grant, and making sure that you have all that documentation in an organized and standardized way so that when you see an opportunity come up, you can apply on a much shorter timeline, and it's not as much of a mental burden for the farmer if they already have this toolkit or portfolio put together. Common application. We would love to see funders, and we would be happy to help with this. The community of practice had a lot of discussion about this, but especially between state agencies, there's a lot of siloing of the process. If it is a state agency, even within one agency, there could be multiple application pathways. Standardizing a common application as much as possible is a big midterm recommendation of this project. We would love to see the ability for folks to fill out one application and check boxes to be considered for multiple grant programs, with, of course, new specialty questions for each program. We understand you need different information for different programs, but you are asking for a lot of the baseline information the same way in all of these things. So having a common application between related grant programs or grant programs under the same agency or across agencies at the same level of government would be a huge improvement on the current process. And long-term, we discussed the possibility, this is something that needs more development, but a database of farmers who you can opt into the database and be considered for a suite of government or private, whoever opts into the process. But that is something that we discussed in the long term to take the burden of search off of the farmer and put it on the funder. So they would be looking for farmers that fit their program, not farmers looking for programs that fit their opportunity. So that is the end of our recommendations, but I wanted to mention the limitations of this project. There is not going to be a lot of time for questions. I'm so sorry. We did not have any formal partnerships with tribal entities during this project. That is a blind spot that I want to acknowledge, and that future work in this area should engage with tribal communities and the agriculture that they're doing and how they access these same types of programs. There was less representation from Southeast, Northeast, and the South Coast of Oregon. We had representation from, I listed all the partners from Klamath and High Desert and up and down the Willamette Valley and in Southern Oregon. But the Southeast region, like Burns, and the Northeast region up in Wallowa and Baker counties, as well as the South Coast, did not have as much representation. There were federal funding interruptions that limited the efficacy of the project, and there were resource limitations and some turnover at partner organizations that led to some staffing changes throughout the 2-year period, which is unavoidable. But we wanted to acknowledge that some of the folks who started the program, someone else was in that position by the end of the program, and that led to some interruptions and some relearning that could provide limitation on the project. Okay, I am finally done. Stop share.